My name is Jorgenson, and the colonial craftsmen. I'm going to talk about the silversmith. In 1652, the village of Boston was an important port, with new families arriving on every ship. With them they brought silver coins and paper money issued by England. The people of the colonies preferred the coins, but England controlled the amount, so the colonies would not be rich and powerful. The colonists asked England for more silver, but they said no. So in 1652, 124 years before the Declaration of Independence, the colonies defied England. John Hall was appointed master, and the colonies opened their own mint. Hall received 1 silver coin for every 20 he coined and became rich and important. He probably was the first silversmith in the American colonies. The mint produced coins for 32 years. Business grew. People became rich. The only problem now was people were rich but had no savings place for their coins. They in turn would bring all their silver coins to the silversmith and have them melted down into different kinds of pieces. In those days, you could buy a piece of land with a silver bowl if they were of equal value. The first step in making something out of silver was to bring your coins to the silversmith. Then you would decide how much the silver was worth and what you wanted made. The silver was melted down and poured into a mold called an ingot. This looked like a brick. Pure silver is very soft, so a copper alloy had to be added. It was melted again and formed into sheets. The sheets were melted and pounded together for the thickness wanted. A pattern was already prepared for the object, and with shears the sheets of silver would be cut. The silversmith would then use several different anvils and hammer to shape or engrave the object. When it was finished, smooth stone or pumice was used for polishing. The silversmith now struck his mark on the piece, identifying himself and guaranteeing its high quality. One of the most famous silversmiths was Paul Revere of Boston. The silversmith skills and craftsmanship was regarded as one of honest practice and high quality. Thank you. Will you please stop the tape? My name is Leach and the colonial craftsmen I'm going to talk about are the printers. Of all the colonial American craftsmen who used their skills to build a nation, none was as close to the spirit of liberty as the printer. He was said to be as important as the men who actually fought on the bloody battlefield. The first printing press in America was brought from England in 1638 by Mr. Glover and Mr. Dage. Mr. Glover died at sea, but Mr. Dage took over. At that time, Mr. Dage could only print what he was told to print by the English and the church, or else he would lose his license, his job, and would not have any money to live. One of the first printers to print what he felt rather than what he was told was a man named William Bradford from Pennsylvania. In 1693, he printed a series of pamphlets the Quakers did not like and was forced to move to New York. He founded New York's first newspaper, the New York Gazette. At the same time, the people of Boston were also printing the newspaper called Boston Newsletter. Probably the most famous of all printers was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin got his start in his brother James' shop in Boston, where at the age of 15 he wrote and printed various articles under the name of Mrs. Silence Dogood. That helped to sell more papers. At the age of 17, he left his brother and went to Pennsylvania and opened his own press. He printed Poor Rich's Almanac and the Pennsylvania Gazette. Even though Benjamin Franklin was a famous patriot, diplomat, scientist, inventor, author, and thinker, he always wrote of himself, "I, Benjamin Franklin, printer." One of the biggest turning points in the freedom of printers to print the truth was the trial in 1735, John Peter Zenger. In this trial, the jury ruled against the judge's wishes, that Zenger could print whatever he wanted to as long as it was the truth. For the next 40 years, England suffered the attacks on her authorities made by furious colonists and their printing presses. Printing is a way of putting letters, words, sentences, and pictures onto a piece of paper. Three things needed for printing are metal type, ink, and printing press. The printer would take each single letter of type and place them so they would spell words and arrange in sentences. The type was inked and the paper was pressed onto the type. When all the type was a certain size and their letters were called fonts. Some letters were used more than others, and the printer had more of these. For example, he would have more E's than X's. The American printer was a man of many talents. He was a writer and editor who prepared and corrected the work, a publisher who issues the paper for sale, a compositor who arranges the type letters, and a craftsman who operates the press. Sometimes he had apprentices called devils who helped at the same time they were learning the trade. The type was kept in a very shallow tray, divided into many small sections, and was called a case. The letters were not arranged in alphabetical order, but by convenience, with the letters used most closest. The compositor's first job was to memorize the position of each letter in the case. When the compositor was ready to arrange or set the letters into words, he would tack the handwritten copy onto a stick. He then would take the letters out of the case without looking and place them in order on a composing stick. When the composing stick was filled, he placed it in a metal can called a galley. The galley was filled with the composing sticks to make a full printed page. The galleys were then placed in a metal frame called a chase, and the chase into a larger frame called the form. All the letters are then tapped in the form with a flat piece of wood, so the letters would all be level. The form was then ready for the press. The paper was pressed against the form by the printing press. The paper was dampened to make sure it would lie flat. When the printing was finished, the page was removed and allowed to dry. The process was repeated until enough copies were made of this page. Then the type was removed, cleaned, and placed in the type case. This method of printing is basic method still used today. The early colonial printer did not always have the best tools, materials, or equipment, but he made the best of what he had, so his ideas that he printed could clearly and easily be read. Thank you for listening. Please stop the tape.
My name is Authelet in the colonial craftsmen. I'm going to talk about the paper makers. Paper makers in early colonial times took a great deal of skill, and few men were trained to make paper. Those men who were trained to make paper stayed in Europe because there were enough tribes in Europe, and there was no reason to cross the ocean and live in an uncivilized wilderness. Nevertheless, a German papermaker named William Rittenhouse came to America in 1688 and formed a partnership with William Bradford of Germantown, Pennsylvania. Together, Rittenhouse plus Bradford built the first paper mill in America in 1690 by a creek near Germantown. Their partnership ended quickly when Bradford was forced to move to New York because he printed pamphlets that the people of Pennsylvania didn't like. Rittenhouse continued to make paper for some years afterwards, and as more people came to America, the demand for paper increased. Businesses needed paper for writing out sales. Government needed paper for making records. Printers needed it for books, pamphlets, newspapers. Surveyors needed paper for making maps, and people everywhere needed paper for writing letters to friends in the old world. As years went by, more and more paper mills were built to try to help meet the demand for paper. England didn't like the idea of paper mills in America because she sent paper to America, but England didn't at first try to stop the mills because the demand for paper was so large that it didn't bother their business. Besides, at that time, the paper was more made from rags, which were very scarce in America. America didn't have many rags in those days that they used for other purposes. As time went on, the people of America became very mad because England tried to limit the amount of paper being made because the Americans were saying bad things about England. After the American Revolution began, paper became even more scarce because England stopped sending paper to America. Rags became even more scarce, and the skilled papermakers were fighting in the war. The situation became so bad that all the papermakers were ordered to be discharged from the army and told to go make paper. General Washington and his officers had difficulty sending orders because there was no paper. In this way, the papermakers did their part to winning freedom for America. Material methods and tools used in the colonial times for making paper were much the same as those used by the Chinese many years before. The first step in the paper making process was to collect rags which was used as the basic fibers of paper. The best bags were cotton and linen. Then the bags were thrown in a pile by rag pickers and soaked with water for from 6 to 8 weeks. The fibers of the rags would separate as the rags rotted, which was called fermentation. After the fermentation period, the rags were placed in large vat holes where they were pounded and beaten until they became pulp. This pulp called starch was then washed and stored in chests. An apprentice would then take a small bucket of stock from the chest and mix it in a large tub of water. He would mix until a proper mixture of stock and water came within an inch of the top. The vatman who made the paper then took over. He held in his hands a wooden frame strung with wire, resembling a screen. He dipped it straight up and down into the water. He then raised it out flat so to catch the fibers on the screen. He then shook the screen back and forth and side to side to make the fibers stick together. He then passed the frame to a man called a coulter. The coulter would judge when it was dry enough, and then he slipped it onto a piece of silk cloth without the slightest wrinkle. The coulter would then pass the frame back to the side of the vat so the vatman could use it again without stopping. The coulter would pile the paper with a piece of felt between each sheet until he reached 144 sheets for one post. Each post was put in a hand screw press to be squeezed until as much water as possible was squeezed out. All the men in the mill helped in the turning of the screw press. When this was done, the man called a layman separated the felt from the paper and stacked the paper in a neat pile. The paper was squeezed lightly several more times until the paper was quite flat. Then the papers were hung to dry in airy room. As the paper dried, you could see the different designs in the paper made by the moles. These designs were called watermarks. Some printers used their initials or made pictures like birds, crowns, flowers, etc. Some people had paper made especially for them with their own watermarks. George Washington and Franklin had their own paper. If you look at my name, you will see my initials, TS. The paper, when it dried, was very rough, and the ink would be really soaked up. The paper needed to be smoothed out. This was done by rubbing a smooth stone over the paper, or by using a sizing. The paper would be dipped in the sizing, and the sizing would fill up the holes. The paper was then put through rollers to smooth it. This was the finished product. Thank you for listening. Come again to listen to the other craftsmen. Please don't let this tape run out. Thank you.
My name is Michael Shea, and the colonial craftsmen I'm going to talk about are the doctors. When people came to America in the early days of the colony, they had to be strong and healthy and adventurous. Even though they were healthy, many people suffered from shipboard diseases and illnesses such as scurvy. There weren't many doctors here, and these doctors that were here did not follow good scientific medical ways. For example, the cure for a disease thought to be caused by too much fluid in the body was to cut the patient and make him bleed to get rid of the fluid. This, of course, only made the patient sicker. Many times, doctors would give the patient a food that looks like a part of his body that hurt. If he has a headache, he would get the inside of a walnut because it looks like his brain. If he has a sore kidney, he would get a kidney bean. These natural cures really healed, but were based on a medical idea over 1,000 years old. At all times, the patient might be given a violent rub-down, a scalding hot or an icy cold bath, or a hot bandage which used to blister the skin. In fact, in the early colonial times, the doctors' remedies were often so painful or so drastic that they were almost worse than the illnesses themselves. Not much was known about the human body or its ailments and their causes and cures. Most of the medicines were made from herbs and roots of plants. As time went on, the English began to borrow many ideas from the native Indians. Many of the first doctors to arrive in America were more interested in land, treasure, politics, and power. They often refused to care for a patient unless the patient has money to pay. Laws were passed to stop this practice. Many of the settlers who lived away from the town and villages used a book called the Herbal, which told about how to use herbs.
spices, leaves, and roots to help cure their families' sicknesses. Most of the early doctors were both clergymen and physicians. They often combined prayers and medicine, but still no too many people were dying. Doctors began to take on apprentices, just like the other craftsmen in the colonies. There were still, however, many people who said they were doctors, but really knew very little about it. More and more colonists were being sent to Europe to learn the right way. No matter how hard the doctors worked, they couldn't stop many people from dying because the diseases spread, causing this, what is called epidemics. Laws were passed to try to stop the spread of contagious diseases by putting people in homes by themselves. This was called quarantine. The first person to use inoculations or shots to help prevent diseases were Cotton Mather and Zebriel Boylston. They used a needle to help prevent smallpox. As years passed, other people began to use inoculations. Gradually, hospitals were built and medical societies were formed. Some American colleges had degrees in medicine. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, 4 doctors were among the signees. During the Revolution, a military medical department was formed. The first Surgeon General was 33 years old, Dr. Benjamin Rush of Philadelphia. The conditions on the battlefields and in the hospitals during the war were terrible. There were few supplies and much filth. In spite of these horrible conditions, the doctors learned a great deal. After the war, Dr. Rush became one of the greatest American teaching doctors of all times. He was always willing to listen to and encourage new and different medical experiments. Many of his former students tried to follow in the footsteps of this great American doctor. I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. Thank you. Please stop the tape and rewind it. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Lacht.
My name is James Langley, and we are going to talk about the colonial potters.
All pottery is made from clay. We get clay from deposits at the bottom of lakes, oceans, or streams. Clay is a good material for making certain pieces because it sticks together and is always easily shaped. Simple pottery, if properly made, is fireproof and will hold liquids. It is inexpensive and easily replaced. The colonists used pottery pots in the kitchen, and most used pottery tableware as well as pewter and wooden dishes. Most of the pottery was plain and useful.
From time to time, potters tried to organize small pottery factories. They also tried to master the art of making porcelain, but was not successful. The making of good quality pottery in America came to a halt in 1774 and was not begun again until the war was over.
Potters began their work by preparing the clay. First, the clay had to be washed, mixed with a fine sand, and left to dry. Before it could be used, the potter would then decide what type of pieces he would make. Cut off a lump of clay, place it upon the potter's wheel, and begin to create. There were two types of potter's wheels used at this time: a kick wheel turned by the foot or a hand wheel turned by the free hand of the potter.
As the wheel turned, the potter molded the clay with his hands, constantly dipping it in water to keep the clay soft. When the piece was molded, a glaze was painted on to make it watertight. Then another liquid called slip was added to make it easier for the potter to decorate. Finally, a dye was painted around the edges for decoration. The piece was then placed in a kiln for 1 to 3 days. It then had to be cooled for another 2 days.
In early colonial days, the red clay used in pottery caused a deadly poison to the user. Finally, someone came up with a new clay base that didn't contain that red material. This was called stoneware. It was treated the same way, molded the same, cooked in the kiln, but does not contain that deadly red poison.
The people of colonial America didn't think very highly of the potter. It was because the material they used was not as valuable or precious as the silversmith or glassmaker. Yet they were skilled workmen who used their bare hands in their craft.
Please stop the tape.
My name is Stephen Engle and the colony craftsmen. I'm going to talk about the glassmakers. America's first factory was a glass house founded in 1608 by a group of English gentlemen. They were sent here by the London Company and James I of England to start a glass house using the raw materials found here. They wanted to make glass cheaply and ship it back to England. The first factory closed in 1609 because there was not enough laborers or workers, plus the need of glass in New America was not a necessity. In 1621, the second glass house in Jamestown was started. This time, they decided to make colored glass, beads, for trade with the Indians. Again, it was not successful and closed in 1624. Now, 115 years later, 1739, the making of glass started again in America. Caspar Wistar started his factory in New Jersey. He made glass like they did in Jamestown, and it was called soda lime glass. It was dark, not clear, sounded dull when struck, and inexpensive to make. Then in 1765, Henry Striegel founded a new way of making clear light glass. This was called flint glass. It was light, clear, sounded like a bell when struck, but very expensive to make. To make a glass object, usually 4 men are involved: a mixer, fireman, an assistant gatherer, and a master grapher. The fireman first prepares the furnace with a roaring fire. Then the mixer gathers the ingredients and puts them in a clay pot. He gives this to the assistant gatherer. The mixture is melted or fused into a batch of hot white liquid. Now the assistant with a blowpipe scoops up the hot liquid to be formed. 2 methods can be used. The gaffer can blow a glass bubble and shape it by hand, or blow a glass bubble into a mold. Tools used by a glassmaker were a blowpipe, bottle door, which is a wooden paddle used for flattening, pucellers are tongs used for twisting, shears for cutting, and pincers for squeezing. Colonial glassmakers were very skilled craftsmen. They were able to improve the methods and think of new ways to make better glass. They created elegant glassware and began a tradition of craftsmanship that is still with us today. Please stop the tape recorder. Don't let it run out. Thank you.
My name is John Cortellessa.
My name is Tim Authelet. And we would like to talk to you about the colonial craftsmen called the cabinet makers or furniture makers.
In the early colonial days, the people were not concerned with making beautiful furniture. Their main job in the first few years was simply staying alive. After a while, they began to build some furniture that was simple, heavy, and practical. The first furniture makers were the people called coopers. The coopers were people who made barrels and fixed holes in these barrels. No ship could leave England in those days unless they had at least one master cooper aboard. One of the most famous master coopers who made furniture in the early colonial days was the man from nearby Plymouth colony named John Alden.
In the late 17th century, more and more furniture makers came to America, and more fancy furniture that was much lighter and more decorated than before. They also followed the English styles because these people came from England. Also at this time, the furniture makers formed an association and called themselves cabinet makers. Another name for cabinet makers at this time was joiners. They were called this because they joined pieces of wood together.
As the people got more money, they began to want prettier furniture. The cabinet makers made desks, tables, chairs, and cabinets in English style, but added their own little ideas and gave the furniture an American quality. This style was called Queen Anne or William and Mary after the King and Queen of England at that time.
The next period was the years 1750 through 1783, and all the American cabinet makers were followers of an English cabinet maker named Thomas Chippendale. Although the Americans followed Chippendale style, they used many Native American words such as walnut, chestnut, beech, pine, gum, apple, sycamore, cherry, cedar, pine, and tulip.
The American cabinet makers were usually everywhere educated because they needed to know geometry, mathematics, and meaning in order to make the furniture to stand in perfect balance and stay strong. Some American cabinet makers became so skillful that they labeled their work like an artist who painted a picture.
The tools of the colonial cabinet maker were not unlike the tools of the modern furniture maker. If you look at the tools we made, you will see some of these. They are mallets, which is like a heavy hammer, frame saw, square chisels, and gouges, hand planes, bench planes, saw, calipers, scribing gauge, and gimlet. The machines were also similar to the electric machines of today, except
that they were run by foot power and hand power.
The lathe was used to shape pieces of furniture like the legs of table. The piece of wood turned quickly, while the man shaped it with one of his tools. The workbench was large, thick, and heavy, had clamps or vices which were used to hold steady the pieces of wood to be worked on. There were two kinds of wood, primary and secondary wood. Primary wood was wood that looked good and the outside, such as cherry, maple, oak, and black walnut. Secondary woods was used for the inside and frames such as pine, white cedar, and tulip.
The cabinet maker put the furniture together piece by piece, making sure they fit perfectly where one piece joined another. Where the pieces joined together was called joints. There were different kinds of joints that the cabinet maker used. He never used metal nails, but relied on how well he could make precise joints. If he needed extra strength, he would use a wooden peg or warm glue to make it stronger.
After he joined the pieces of wood, he would begin to finish the wood. This means he will match the different wood grain, stain, or slack it, the wood, and wax it. This would help protect from scratching, dampness, and cold and heat. Before he finished the wood, he would first spend much time smoothing it with sandpaper or glass paper. The finishing process would take many hours to be completed.
The cabinet makers in the big cities had plenty of work, but those in the country did not always have good business. To add to their incomes, they turned to making coffins. Some found this very profitable and sometimes became undertakers and funeral directors.
Many of the pieces made during colonial times are still in use today. The pieces of furniture are still beautiful, sturdy, and worth much money. Many of these pieces of furniture can be seen in museums such as the Rhode Island School of Design Museum in Providence.
Don't forget to stop the tape and rewind it. Thank you.
My name is Shea Robinson, and the Christopher Colonial craftsmen. I am going to talk about our candle makers. The colonial Americans made their candles from animal fats and hemp. The coarse animal fat, or tallow, was used for the waxy part and hemp for the wick. Tallow contained an unknown hardening substance. It came from meat drippings of the sheep or oxen, and sometimes bear or deer fats were used. Hog tallow was most never used because the candles
made from this gave off black smoke and an awful smell. Bayberry candles were mostly used for they were harder and sturdier. They were greenish in color and gave off a pleasant odor, especially after being extinguished. The bayberry bush grew near the sea and produced silver-looking berries. These berries were gathered by the children in autumn and prepared for the candles by placing in boiling water. The activity of the candle making took place during the autumn season. The colonial ladies used one of three basic methods to making candles. One method was called hand pressing. This was done with warm beeswax pressed around a hemp wick, just like you would form clay around a piece of string. The most popular method was dripping. This method centered around the huge fireplace in the kitchen. Large metal kettles full of tallow was heated over the fire. Away from the heat, 2 chairs were placed about 3 feet away from each other. The candle rods or sticks looking like a ladder were placed on the top. From the candle rods hung on the hemp looped at the top and hanging down to the right length. The hot tallow was carried to the candle rods and the dipping process began. The hot tallow could stick to the hemp as it cooled. The process was done several times to get the right thickness. The ladies had to be very careful not to get the tallow in the kettles, not so hot that it would melt the tallow already on the hemp. The last method was called molding. Again, the hot tallow was prepared by the fireplace. A candle molding looking like a wooden box with metal tubes placed inside. The hemp was placed inside each tube and tied at the bottom. The hot tallow was then poured into the tubes.
The only problem with this method was to be careful to keep the hemp tight and straight as the hot tallow was poured in. When the candles were finished, they were wrapped and stored in tin boxes. A good tipper could make between 150 to 200 candles a day. Please stop the tape. Don't let it run out. Thank you.